My husband wasn't supposed to have anyone living with him, and certainly not her. The moment I stepped through the doorway after 10 years abroad, the person who turned around to look at me shattered every piece of my reality. I'm glad you're here to hear this, because I still don't know how I stayed upright that day. And honestly, I'm not sure how I stayed human. Before I begin, tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. And if stories like this stay with you, please like and subscribe. It really helps me continue sharing the truths I've carried for years. Anyway, let me pull you into the moment everything began to crack. It was late afternoon when my plane landed back in Ohio. I hadn't been home in 10 years, not because I didn't want to be, but because life kept pulling me in different directions. Working overseas was supposed to be temporary, a 2-year contract that stretched, then stretched again, until a decade had passed without me even noticing the weight of it. My husband, Michael, had always said he understood. He'd visit when he could, and we kept our marriage stitched together with long calls, shared photos, and a promise that one day we'd finally settle back under the same roof again. That day was supposed to be the beginning of that promise coming true. Michael thought I was arriving next week. I didn't tell him I changed my flight. I wanted to surprise him, a silly, romantic gesture, the kind you see in those corny airport videos. I imagined him standing in our driveway, confused at first, then smiling wide as he rushed to hug me. I imagined the smell of our home again, the one I left behind when opportunities overseas felt too big to refuse. I imagined my suitcases bumping against the old wooden railing, the one he swore he'd fix but never did. I imagined us reunited, ready to finally live the life we'd paused for far too long. I imagined a lot of things. Reality didn't match any of them. I remember stepping out of the cab and pulling my suitcase along the walkway leading to our porch. The air felt strangely quiet, as if the whole neighborhood knew something I didn't. The curtains were drawn tighter than I remembered. The lawn wasn't exactly neglected, but it had lost the careful touch Michael used to give it. He used to mow in these neat lines, proud of how crisp they looked. Now the grass leaned in odd directions, like it didn't know which way life was supposed to go anymore. My heart was beating fast, not from fear, just from excitement. 10 years away from home does something to you. It stretches you out, pulls pieces of you in different directions until you're not sure what still belongs to you. Coming back felt like pulling myself back together. I didn't knock. I didn't think I had to. The door wasn't even locked. I pushed it open, and everything inside was different. Not messy, but changed. Softer colors, a different style of throw blankets, a vase of flowers on the entryway table, except Michael never bought flowers. He hated the smell of lilies, yet there they were, fresh and blooming. That's when I heard footsteps. Light ones, too light to be Michael's. "Hello," I called out, and she turned the corner. A woman, mid-20s maybe, barefoot, wearing one of Michael's old t-shirts, the faded baseball one he loved but I always teased him about because it made him look like a retired coach. I thought I had the wrong house. I genuinely did. The confusion hit me faster than the pain. She froze when she saw me. Her eyes widened, like a child caught doing something they knew they shouldn't. And for a second, neither of us moved. Then she whispered, "Oh my God, you're her." Huh, like I was a ghost that had wandered back home. She took a step backward. I took one forward. My suitcase wheels tapped against the hardwood floor as everything inside me scrambled to make sense of this. My mind kept trying to rewrite what I was seeing. Maybe she was a cousin, a friend, a tenant, someone who stopped by, someone helping Michael with something. Anything but what the truth really was. But then I noticed something. On the hallway wall, where our framed wedding picture used to hang, the one of us laughing instead of posing, there was a different frame. A painting. Something abstract. Something soulless. My picture was gone. That told me everything before she even opened her mouth again. She swallowed hard, clutching the hem of the shirt that didn't belong to her. He didn't tell me you'd come back." The words hit me like cold water poured down my spine. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just stood there, perfectly still, Like if I didn't move, the world would stop spinning long enough for me to understand how my life had shifted without me. All I could say was, "Where's Michael?" She hesitated. That hesitation felt like another betrayal laid on top of the feist. She glanced toward the kitchen, then back at me, as if she expected him to walk out and take responsibility for this nightmare. He didn't. She stepped aside, not quite meeting my eyes. "He'll be home soon." Soon. Like he was just out running errands. Like this was normal. Like I was the intruder. I walked past her before she could say anything else. My legs moved on autopilot, carrying me deeper into the house that still had the bones of my home but wore a stranger's skin now. The couch was different. The rug was new. The scent in the air wasn't ours. Nothing looked like the life I left behind. I didn't sit. I didn't unpack. I didn't even take off my coat. I just stood there, letting the reality fold itself around me piece by piece. Every change detail felt like a knife gently pressed into my ribs, not enough to kill, but enough to make sure I felt every second of it. 10 years. 10 years of trusting him. 10 years of believing our marriage was waiting for me. 10 years of telling myself that love could stretch across oceans. And he replaced me. Just like that. I heard her moving around behind me, nervous, shifting her weight from foot to foot. She tried to speak once or twice but stopped herself. And I didn't blame her for that. Whatever explanation she had, I wasn't ready to hear it. I didn't even know what question to ask first. But there was one thing I knew with painful clarity. This wasn't the end of the story. This was the beginning. Because the moment I stepped into that living room and saw the remnants of someone else's life woven into the fabric of mine, something inside me cracked open. Something small and sharp and determined. Something that whispered, "Find the truth. All of it. No matter how much it hurts." And that thought alone pulled me forward into the next moment, the next breath, the next step into a reality that no longer felt like mine. I didn't know then just how deep the betrayal ran. I didn't know the lies he'd told, the secrets he'd buried, the promises he'd twisted to keep two lives running parallel without ever letting them collide. I didn't know the woman standing behind me had her own story, one that tangled with mine in ways neither of us could have predicted. And I didn't know that walking through that unlocked door would unravel everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the person I had vowed to spend my life with. All I knew was that the real storm hadn't even started yet. And when it finally did, none of us would walk away unchanged. Because coming home didn't just break me, it exposed the life he never wanted me to see. And that's where everything truly began. Before everything fell apart, before that moment in the doorway when my heart felt like it quit beating altogether, my life with Michael had been simple, familiar, soft in the way long-term love becomes soft, not loud or fiery, but steady and warm, like the hum of a refrigerator at night. You don't notice it until it stops. I met him back when we were both 24, broke, and trying to figure out who we were supposed to become. He was working as a paramedic, pulling long shifts and living on energy drinks, and I was still in grad school, drowning in research papers and caffeine. We found each other accidentally. A mutual friend dragged me to a barbecue I didn't want to attend, and he was the guy flipping burgers like he was auditioning for some kind of backyard competition show. He was funny, and more than that, he was kind. He had this quiet, dependable aura, like he'd catch you if you tripped even before you realized you were falling. I'd dated people who made everything dramatic or chaotic, people who loved the rush of emotional fireworks. Michael wasn't like that. He brought calm. He brought stability. He brought a feeling of being safe. Safe became something I didn't realize I'd cling to. We married young, 27, in a small ceremony with only 50 guests. Everything about it was imperfect in the way real moments tend to be. The cake melted a little in the heat. Someone tripped on my train. Michael forgot the rings in the car and had to sprint back for them, laughing so hard his eyes watered. I loved that day because it wasn't glamorous. It was us. Two kids pretending to be adults, but somehow making it work. And for a long time, we did make it work. Our house wasn't big, but it was cozy. 2 bedrooms, A living room just large enough for a couch that both of us pretended didn't hurt our backs. A kitchen that always smelled faintly like burnt toast because Michael refused to buy a new toaster even after ours developed a habit of overcooking everything. The walls were covered in photos, some framed, some taped carelessly, of road trips, hikes we complained through, birthday dinners at cheap restaurants. It was messy and lived in and loved. Life felt predictable, but in the best way. We had routines. Saturday morning coffee runs, Sunday afternoon movie marathons, Wednesday night walks around the neighborhood after his shifts because he said the fresh air helped clear the chaos from his job. There were moments I wish I could freeze in time. Moments like waking up to him bringing me a cup of peppermint tea when I was sick, or him telling me, after a particularly rough week, "You don't have to be strong every day, you know. I've got you." I replay those moments now, sometimes more than I should. Not because I miss him, that part of me has changed, but because I want to understand how someone who could be that gentle could also become the man who let another woman stand barefoot in my living room wearing his shirt. It didn't happen overnight. Nothing ever does. My career overseas started with a job offer that felt too good to refuse. A research fellowship. A chance to work with brilliant minds. An opportunity that would have taken most people decades to reach. When I first told Michael about it, he didn't react the way I expected. He didn't panic. He didn't ask me not to go. He just held my hands and said, "I won't be the one to hold you back." At the time, those words meant everything. They felt like love. They felt like partnership. The plan, in the beginning, was short term. 1 year, then 2, then the fellowship extended, then another grant came through, then a teaching position opened. Life kept unfolding faster than we could gather it back together. We tried to stay connected. We really did. I flew home for holidays. He visited when his schedule allowed. We FaceTimed more than any couple should. We talked about mundane things, grocery shopping, broken light bulbs, funny coworkers, and heavy things, loss, stress, loneliness. But distance, no matter how romanticized, is slow erosion. It pulls at the edges first, gently, like waves licking at the shore. You don't notice the sand disappearing until you look back and realize the coastline has changed completely. There were small moments when I sensed the shift. Little things, like him being distracted on our calls, or forgetting to mention details he normally would have shared, or the way he stopped asking when I was coming home for good. Still, I brushed all of it aside. Long distance is exhausting. Long distance changes rhythms. Long distance makes even love feel quiet sometimes. I told myself everything was normal. When I got promotions overseas, he congratulated me. I believed him. Maybe he really meant it. But sometimes there was a hesitation in his voice, something I couldn't name back then. Almost like he wanted to ask me when I'd choose him over everything else again. But he never asked directly. And maybe I didn't offer the reassurance I should have. Maybe I didn't see the loneliness creeping into him. Maybe I didn't understand how hard it is to love someone you can't physically hold for months at a time. I'm not excusing what he did, but I'm not blind to the cracks, either. During those 10 years, our home changed slowly. He redecorated once or twice, nothing drastic. He said it was to make the place feel updated. I didn't argue. After all, I wasn't the one living in it every day. But something subtle always nagged at me whenever I visited. A feeling like the space no longer reflected us, but him. Only him. And maybe someone he hadn't told me about yet. One memory sticks out sharply now. It was about 3 years before I came home for good. I visited for 2 weeks. Jet lag had me waking up earlier than usual, and I remember one morning I walked into the kitchen and saw 2 coffee mugs drying on the rack. Not unusual, except Michael doesn't drink coffee. He never has. It makes him jittery. When I asked about it, he barely looked up. "Oh, that's from when my buddy stopped by." "Which buddy?" I asked. He shrugged. "Just a work friend. You don't know him." I believed him. Why wouldn't I? But now, when I replay that moment, I wonder if that was the first clue. The first tiny shift in the air that I ignored because love makes us blind in ways we don't admit until hindsight forces us to. Life overseas was demanding. conferences, deadlines, research groups. My schedule filled easily, and in the busy hum of my work, it was simple to pretend everything back home remained frozen in place. It let me pretend our life together would magically revert to what it used to be the second I stepped off a plane. But people don't freeze. Relationships don't freeze. Time doesn't freeze. It molds us, reshapes us, nudges us in directions we never expected. And somewhere in those 10 years, Michael and I drifted so far apart we couldn't even see each other clearly anymore. Still, I never suspected a betrayal. Not even when his calls became shorter. Not even when he forgot plans more often. Not even when he seemed almost relieved when I told him I had accepted another extension overseas. I mistook his distance for stress. I mistook his silence for exhaustion. I mistook his emotional retreat for something temporary. Looking back, there was one night, maybe the clearest sign of all, when he made a comment that should have stopped me in my tracks. I had been talking about coming home permanently within a year or two, and he had gone quiet for a beat too long. Then he said, "Are you sure? You've built a whole life there. I don't want you to give that up." At the time, I thought he was being supportive. I told myself he didn't want me to resent him. But the truth I didn't see then, was that he wasn't afraid of me giving up my life abroad. He was afraid of me coming home. He was afraid of me walking into the house and finding exactly what I found. But that realization only fully settled in after I stood there, confronted by a woman wearing his shirt, telling me he'd be home soon. The past, all those years of tiny imbalances, little moments of hesitation, brief shadows crossing his voice, suddenly made perfect sense. The puzzle pieces that never quite fit now slid together effortlessly, forming a picture I didn't want to look at but couldn't turn away from. Yet in those earlier years, wrapped in the illusion of safety, I didn't question anything. Life felt stable. Trust felt natural. Love felt enough. And that's the heartbreaking part. How deep trust can run, how easily it can blind you, how quietly everything can unravel without you hearing a single thread snap. Until you walk through your own front door and find someone else living the life you thought was waiting for you. That moment, that final collision of past and present, didn't come out of nowhere. It had been years in the making. And still, I wasn't prepared for how much more I was about to uncover. Because the woman in my house wasn't just a stranger. And Michael's betrayal wasn't just a lapse in judgment. No, it was a life built on layers I hadn't even begun to peel back yet. And as I stood in my own home, breathing air that didn't feel like mine anymore, one thought echoed louder than anything else. Something about this story was much, much bigger than infidelity. I didn't sit down right away. I couldn't. My body felt like it was vibrating. Fear, anger, confusion. I don't even know what cocktail of emotion was dragging me under. The woman behind me, this stranger who wasn't really a stranger anymore, hovered near the kitchen doorway like she wasn't sure if she should offer me water or run out the back door. I stepped into the living room slowly, almost cautiously, as if I were entering a crime scene. Maybe in a way, I was. Everything was familiar, but wrong. Like someone had taken the blueprint of my life and rearranged the rooms ever so slightly so I'd feel constantly off balance. The couch wasn't ours. The photos on the shelves weren't ours. The warm throw blanket I used to wrap myself in was gone, replaced by something trendy and neutral. The rug, that one was the worst. I bought that rug on our 5th anniversary, after hunting for weeks to find one soft enough for Michael because he always joked that his feet deserved better. Seeing a different rug there, one that looked expensive, modern, stylish, sent a rush of heat up my neck. Not because I cared about the rug itself, but because it meant something. It meant choices had been made without me. It meant someone else had a say in a home that was supposed to be ours. I turned to the woman finally. She was watching me like I was a ticking bomb. "What's your name?" I asked. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then tried once more. Lena. Lena. A soft name. A short one. One that didn't feel sharp enough to fit into the jagged edges my world had just split into. She wrapped her arms around herself, holding tight like she was cold. I didn't know you were still together." That sentence hit me harder than anything she could have confessed outright. Still together. I repeated slowly, tasting the words like something bitter. She flinched. I mean, he told me you were separated. I almost laughed because the alternative was screaming. Separated? Separated. It felt ridiculous. It felt surreal. It felt like the kind of lie someone tells a woman they plan to sneak into a life they haven't fully dismantled yet. I looked around once more. The changes weren't accidental. The shift in atmosphere wasn't temporary. This was lived in. This was home, for someone. Maybe for both of them. How long have you lived here? I asked. Lena hesitated, and that hesitation said everything before the number even left her mouth. About a year. A year. A full year. I hadn't even been gone that entire year. I visited home twice. Stayed for a week each time. Somehow, this woman and I never crossed paths. Maybe that was luck. Maybe that was timing. Maybe that was strategy. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice steady. Did Michael ever talk about me? She nodded, but slowly. He said you two were on good terms, that you stayed in touch, but that the marriage was over. She whispered the last word like it might stab her if she said it too loudly. Over. He called our marriage over. My hands trembled slightly, so I folded them together, pressing my fingers tight. And you believed him? Yes. She swallowed. He seemed sincere, and he never hid me. His friends know about me. His family knows. The world tilted. His family knew. Michael had a small family, just his brother, a few cousins, and his mother, who lived an hour away. His mom and I were never extremely close, but she always asked about me during holidays. She sent me one Christmas card every year without fail. Not once did she mention another woman. Not once did anyone hint that Michael wasn't alone. A subtle chill moved across my back. I took in a slow, deep breath because I could feel myself slipping into a place that wasn't calm, and I needed calm. Right now, I needed to understand. I needed pieces, even if they were painful, because the empty spaces in my mind were worse than the truth. What exactly did he tell you about me? I asked. Lena shifted uncomfortably. That you left the marriage to focus on your career. That you weren't coming back. That you didn't want kids and he did, so you drifted apart. That you had an agreement to stay legally married for convenience. Convenience. That word landed like a punch to the gut. Not because it was offensive, but because it was so calculated, such a believable half-lie. Michael always wanted kids. I did too. But timing, life, distance, those things complicated our plans. We talked about someday a lot. Someday when my contract ended. Someday when his schedule eased. Someday when we were in the same place long enough to breathe. But never once did I say I didn't want them anymore. He lied to you, I said quietly. Lena blinked fast, like tears were building. Her voice cracked. I kind of figured that out when you walked in. I didn't feel sorry for her, not yet, but I did recognize that she wasn't the villain of this story. Not the main one, anyway. She was young. Younger than me by maybe 10 years. Probably my age when I first fell in love with Michael. She looked soft, unguarded, like someone who hadn't had enough years yet to learn how sharp life could be. But compassion could come later. Right now, I needed clarity. Before I could ask anything else, the front door clicked. One turn of the knob. One breath frozen inside my chest. One quiet sound that carried the weight of 10 years and one betrayal. Michael walked in. He stepped through the doorway casually, keys in hand, jacket slung over his shoulder, half focused on a grocery bag he was carrying. The normalcy of it made everything feel even more horrifying. He wasn't expecting to find his wife home early. He wasn't expecting his two worlds to collide. He didn't see me first. He saw Lena, and he smiled at her. A small, intimate smile I recognized but hadn't seen directed at me in years. Then he looked up. The grocery bag slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. For a moment, time didn't move. It stretched thin, like a rubber band pulled to its limit. No one breathed. No one spoke. His face drained of color. His lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. His eyes flicked from me to Lena, then back to me again. He looked like a man watching his carefully constructed world collapse brick by brick. "What?" he finally stammered. "What are you doing here?" "Not hi. Not oh my God, you're home. Not I missed you. Just, what are you doing here?" It told me everything I needed to know about where I ranked in his life now. "I live here," I replied evenly. "Or at least, I thought I did." Michael ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit I recognized instantly. Can we talk privately?" "No," I said. "Come. Steady. Too steady. You can talk right here." Lena stepped back, her eyes wide. "Michael." He didn't look at her. He didn't look at me either. He looked at the floor, as if maybe the floor would have answers. Finally, he managed, "I didn't think you'd come back yet." "That's obvious." He winced at my tone, but I didn't soften it. There was a long silence, one that stretched into something suffocating. Then, quietly, he said the first honest sentence of the night. "I didn't plan for this to happen like this." The implication being that he did plan for something. That was the moment, right there, that my stomach dropped. Not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't say. He didn't deny her. He didn't deny the relationship. He didn't deny she lived here. He didn't deny anything. I stood still, but inside me something twisted tightly, like gears locking in place. A slow, creeping awareness began threading its way through my thoughts. There was more than cheating, more than lies, more than betrayal, something deeper, something premeditated, something I hadn't uncovered yet. Lena spoke again, barely above a whisper. "Michael, you told me she wasn't coming back." He closed his eyes. That single motion, those eyelids pressing shut, felt like the first crack in a dam I didn't know was about to burst. It wasn't guilt. It was resignation. Like a man who wasn't shocked he was caught, only shocked at the timing. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I didn't break down. I just stared at the man I had loved for more than a decade. And for the first time since I walked through that door, I understood something with absolute clarity. This wasn't just a messy situation. It was a constructed one, dismantled slowly, rebuilt carefully, and I hadn't even scratched the surface yet. My return hadn't ruined his life. It had exposed it. But the worst part, the part that made my breath catch, was the way he kept glancing toward Lena, not in fear of her reaction, but almost as if he were checking whether she was okay. And not once did he ask if I was. Not once. That was the moment suspicion took root fully in my chest. Dark, cold, coiled. There was something they both weren't telling me. And before long, I would find out exactly what it was. I don't think I'll ever forget the expression on Michael's face, this strange mixture of guilt, dread, and something close to annoyance. It wasn't the look of a man caught in a passionate affair. It wasn't the look of someone terrified of losing his wife. It was more like a person whose messy secret had been dragged into daylight before he'd had the chance to tidy it up. That unsettled me more than anything else. After a long, heavy silence, Lena sank into the armchair and curled her legs up, suddenly looking much smaller than before. I remained standing, even though my legs felt like they could buckle at any moment. And Michael, he stayed near the front door, like he needed an escape route. "Just tell me the truth," I said finally. My voice felt thin, worn. "How long have you two been together?" He didn't answer right away. He rubbed a hand across his jaw. He paced a slow, tight circle. Then he said, 2 years. 2 years. Not one. Not a few months. 2 years. The room spun for a second. I felt something drop inside me, like a stone sinking into deep water, pulling the rest of my insides down with it. 2 years meant he was already involved with her the last time I visited. 2 years meant the nights he cut our calls short weren't just exhaustion. 2 years meant he had already built a life with someone else long before I made plans to retire permanently. 2 years meant he'd let me kiss him goodbye at airports while rushing home to someone who wore his shirts and slept in his bed. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. But something inside me dimmed. "Why?" I asked. It was the only word I could manage. He looked up at me with this empty kind of sadness. "You were gone. For so long. And I didn't know when you were coming back. I told you every year I was coming home soon. And every year you extended your contract. His tone wasn't cruel. It wasn't sharp. It was worse. It was calm. Like he'd had months, maybe years, to practice this justification. I swallowed. So you replaced me. I didn't replace you, he said quickly. It just happened. That's not how moving someone into my house works, Michael. His jaw tightened. He didn't deny it. He didn't explain it. He didn't apologize. Lena's voice cut in softly. Maybe I should leave. No, I said sharply, surprising even myself. You're part of this too. Her face fell, but she stayed seated. She wasn't trying to defend herself. She wasn't even hiding behind him. If anything, she looked confused, like she'd only just begun questioning how much of what she believed was a lie. I turned my attention back to Michael. You told her we were separated. Yes. And that I wasn't coming back. Yes. And that I didn't want kids. He hesitated. I didn't know what you wanted anymore. That sentence stung. Not because it was true, but because it was a coward's answer, vague, deflective, meant to soften the blow without actually taking responsibility. I took a slow breath. My heartbeat felt like a pulse of heat in my throat. What else did you lie about? He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since he walked through the door. Don't do this now. No, I said, my voice sharper than before. This is the only time to do this. He exhaled, defeated. It's complicated. Lena's head snapped toward him. Complicated how? It was again, that flicker of tension between them, the way her voice hardened, the way he almost winced. And suddenly, I understood something. Lena didn't know everything either. She wasn't in on the full truth. She wasn't a willing participant in some elaborate betrayal. She was a piece, an important piece, but not the whole puzzle. Michael, I said softly, what haven't you told either of us? His mouth tightened into a line. His fingers curled into fists, and he didn't answer. That silence was loud enough to shake the room. The unease bubbling in my stomach sharpened into something clearer, more focused. There was another layer to this, one I hadn't touched yet. Something deeper than cheating. Something he was afraid to say out loud. You told me you and your wife only stayed legally married for taxes, Lena murmured, as if trying to prompt him into honesty. You said it didn't mean anything anymore. I stared at her. Taxes? He said that? My mind replayed conversation after conversation, trying to pinpoint when he started seeing me as a convenient legal category instead of a person he loved. I couldn't pinpoint it. Maybe because the shift happened slowly. Maybe because I wasn't here to witness it. Michael ran a shaky hand through his hair again. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. That was the moment I actually felt my anger simmer beneath my ribs. But you did, I said quietly. You hurt both of us. His eyes flashed, not with guilt, but frustration. I didn't ask you to leave for 10 years. My breath caught. Lena stiffened. A hot, sharp ache shot through my chest. I didn't leave, I said. I went to work. I went to build something for us. For our future. He scoffed under his breath. Your future didn't include me. The words cut deep because they weren't shouted. They were whispered like a confession he'd been holding onto for years. Ones he'd probably never planned to say out loud. I took a step back. My knees nearly gave out, but I steadied myself on the edge of the mantel. Lena swallowed hard. Michael, is that why you never talked about her? You told me she didn't want the same life as you. He stayed silent. That silence was another answer, another wound, another truth I wasn't prepared for. I turned away from him, needing space, needing air, needing something that didn't feel like betrayal pressing against the inside of my ribs. My body moved without my mind catching up, and before I knew it, I was walking down the hallway toward the bedroom. Our bedroom. Michael took a step forward. Wait, don't. But I was already reaching for the doorknob. When I pushed the door open, the air left my lungs all at once. The bedroom was different, completely transformed. The furniture was new. The bedding was new. The artwork was new. Nothing of mine remained. Not a pillow, not a scarf, not even the jewelry box he gave me on our third anniversary. My side of the bed didn't exist anymore. My presence in the room had been erased entirely. And sitting on the nightstand, where my frame photo used to be, was a picture of Michael and Lena at a beach, her hair blowing in the wind, his hand wrapped around her waist. My chest tightened painfully, like something was crushing me from the inside. I walked further in, slowly, touching nothing, breathing carefully. In the corner of the room, I found something that broke me more deeply than the photo. A crib, not for a newborn, not for a toddler, but for a baby who wasn't here yet. My vision blurred. My hands trembled. Lena appeared behind me, her voice cracking. I was going to tell you. I didn't know how. I didn't know he hadn't told you anything. She wasn't wearing Michael's shirt because it was comfortable. She was wearing it the way expecting mothers do, choosing clothing that feels soft and loose. Michael stepped into the doorway then. His face was pale, but his eyes held something else. Fear. Not fear of losing me. Not fear of confrontation. Fear of truth. How far along? I whispered, not looking at either of them. Lena hesitated. Then 6 months. 6 months. My legs finally gave out, and I sat on the edge of the bed that wasn't mine anymore, the bed that had replaced the one I used to sleep in. The mattress dipped under me, unfamiliar, hollow, cold. 6 months. That meant when I told Michael I was considering coming home permanently. He already knew he was going to be a father with someone else. He already knew he'd built a new life. A life that didn't include me. A life he didn't want me to see. I didn't know how to tell you, he said quietly. I laughed. A broken, empty sound. You weren't planning to. He didn't deny it. And that was when the real breaking happened. Not earlier in the living room. Not when I saw Lena. Not even when he admitted to 2 years of lies. It was that moment, sitting on a bed that belonged to his new life, staring at a crib that symbolized a future I'd once dreamed of with him, that the truth settled in fully. He hadn't simply fallen out of love. He had built an entire new existence. One he expected me never to return to. One he hoped I wouldn't survive discovering. Because he didn't just betray me. He replaced me. He erased me. He rewrote our story without my permission. And now that I was here, breathing in the truth he tried desperately to hide, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I couldn't walk away quietly. Not after everything he'd taken. The lowest point wasn't the betrayal. It was realizing he had counted on me never finding out. I stayed on the edge of that unfamiliar bed longer than I meant to. Maybe minutes. Maybe an hour. Time didn't have shape anymore. It was just soundless. Heavy, thick enough to drag through like fog. I could hear Michael shifting his weight in the doorway, the floorboards creaking under him. He wasn't trying to comfort me. He wasn't kneeling beside me. He wasn't reaching out. He was waiting. Not for me to recover. No, he wasn't that hopeful. He was waiting to see what kind of woman I was going to become now that I'd learned the full weight of his lies. Lena didn't say another word. She left the room quietly, maybe giving me space, or giving herself distance from the explosion she expected to happen. I can't blame her. If I was standing before the wife of the man who'd knocked me up under false pretenses, I'd be scared too. But the explosion they anticipated never came. Instead, something inside me went cold. Not dead. No. The heart keeps beating whether it wants to or not, but cold enough that the emotions stopped flooding through me and instead settled into something rational. Something sharp. Something calculating. It was strange how clarity made its home inside me. The heartbreak didn't disappear. It just shifted from chaos to a clean, focused ache. A kind of ache that whispered, "You are not as powerless as you feel." For the first time since walking into the house, I stood up. Michael reacted like a man startled by his own guilt. He straightened, shoulders tensing, as if bracing for a slap or a scream. But I didn't give him either. I walked past him, quiet, slow, steady, and he stepped aside automatically, like he no longer had the right to block my path. In a way, he didn't. Not after what he'd done. In the hallway, I paused. The wall where our wedding photo once hung seemed almost to glow in my memory. I could picture it perfectly, him laughing, me laughing harder, our cheeks pressed together because neither of us cared about posing. It was a symbol of a life we promised to protect. Now it was a symbol of everything he'd thrown away. I turned to him. You planned a future without me, I said softly. A full future. A family. A home. And you planned to let me keep believing we still had one together. He didn't speak. He didn't deny. He didn't apologize. He just whispered, I didn't know how to stop it. That was the real truth. He didn't want to make a choice. He wanted me gone without having to feel guilty about sending me away. He wanted Lena without the pressure of ending our marriage. He wanted the life that demanded the least honesty. He wanted the version of himself he could only maintain if I stayed far, far away. I nodded slowly, not because I agreed, but because I understood more than he realized. Michael, I said, you didn't want a wife. You wanted freedom from the life you promised to build. He opened his mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to explain, but I held up a hand. I'm not asking you to justify anything. I'm not here for your reasons anymore. That sentence hung in the air like a snapped rope. I walked into the living room and sank onto the couch, their couch, not mine, and something about sitting there in a space built without me solidified the shift happening inside my chest. This wasn't just betrayal. It was disinheritance. It was eviction from a life I helped build. It was erasure. And people who erase others rarely expect them to return with clarity. The silence between us stretched until Michael finally sat across from me, not too close, not too far. Like he was trying to pick a distance that communicated remorse without actually committing to any action. What happens now? He asked quietly. The question wasn't brave. It wasn't noble. It was the question of a man terrified of consequences he never imagined he'd face. What happens now? 5 minutes earlier, I couldn't have formed an answer. But the stillness inside me had crystallized into something that felt uncannily like power. Now, I said, I stopped protecting myself. He flinched, and I felt a strange, small ripple of satisfaction, not vindictive, just validating. For the first time since I arrived, I wasn't drowning in shock. I was breathing deliberately, thinking clearly. What does that mean? He asked. I studied him. He looked older than I remembered, not in years, but in weight. Like he'd been carrying 2 lives on his shoulders and cracking under the pressure. He wasn't the man who waited up for me during my late-night study sessions. He wasn't the man who left notes in my lunchbox just because. He wasn't the man who held me during the funeral of my father. But maybe he'd been slipping away long before Lena ever entered the frame. What do you do when the person you love becomes unrecognizable? You adapt. You refocus. You reclaim what's yours. First, I said gently, you're going to tell me the whole truth. His eyes flickered. I already did. No, I replied. You gave me pieces. I want the full picture. He looked down at his hands. I don't even know where to start. Start with when you stopped believing in us, I said. Then after a beat, start with when you started believing in her. The question landed like a blow. He shifted, uncomfortable. His throat bobbed. His fingers twitched. I didn't plan any of this, he said finally. I didn't go looking for someone else. I was lonely. I felt abandoned. Abandoned. The word reverberated through my skull. You felt abandoned, I repeated, slow, picking apart each syllable. While I was working 16-hour days in another country so we could eventually have the life we dreamed of. It wasn't that simple, he muttered. It never is, I said. But loneliness isn't a justification. It's an explanation. A weak one, but still an explanation. He didn't argue. After a long pause, he whispered, I didn't think you'd ever really come home. That hit differently, not as an insult, but as a realization. Michael had stopped waiting for me long before I stopped believing we were okay. The problem was, he never told me. And the deeper problem, he had rewritten our story in his head until he convinced himself he was the victim of a life he had full control over. And now I was here, refusing to play the role he expected me to occupy, absent, removed, easy to blame. Lena didn't know, did she? I said. He shook his head. No, she had no idea you were still committed to this marriage. He swallowed. I told her you'd moved on. Moved on. As if my life abroad was evidence of emotional abandonment. As if ambition equaled disinterest. As if my loyalty dissolved because I crossed an ocean for my career. That was the moment everything inside me shifted from grief to something quieter, colder, more purposeful. Michael hadn't just betrayed me. He had cast me as the antagonist in his rewritten version of our life. He had turned me into the absent villain so he could feel justified stepping into a new chapter. And that realization settled the last piece of my resolve. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to fall apart. I was going to reclaim my narrative. And I was going to do it intelligently. Here's what happens next, I said, leaning back into the couch. Michael tensed. Okay. You're going to stay honest from this point forward. Completely. Transparently. He nodded quickly, like a man grabbing the first lifeline thrown his way. You're going to answer my questions when I ask them. Yes. And you're going to understand, I continued, my voice calm but sharper now, that your choices have consequences. Not just legal ones, but emotional, financial, personal ones. He went still. And while you might think I'm here to destroy your little world, I added, I'm not. That's too easy, too messy, too beneath me. He stared at me, confused, wary. What are you going to do? He whispered. I smiled, soft, controlled, almost gentle. I'm going to decide what justice looks like. On my terms, not yours. He looked down, fear flickering behind his eyes. Good. Not because I wanted him afraid, but because fear meant he understood something important. He wasn't in control anymore. And as I sat there, rebuilding myself piece by piece in a house that no longer felt like mine, one truth anchored itself deep inside me. He had spent years preparing for a life without me. Now it was my turn to prepare for a life that didn't revolve around him. I wasn't going to disappear. I wasn't going to be quietly erased. I wasn't going to be the woman he expected me to be. No, I was going to be the woman he never saw coming. And when I finally rose from the ashes of the life he burned, he would feel the heat. What came next wasn't rage. It was strategy. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did Michael. Lena hid in the guest room, probably crying softly behind the door, but I didn't go to her. I wasn't ready for softness. Not yet. Not in that house. Not with those truths hanging heavy in the air. I lay awake on the couch they bought together, listening to the quiet ticking of the living room clock. Every tick felt like a countdown. Every second felt like a reminder of the years I had spent trusting a man who had rewritten our history behind my back. And by morning, something inside me snapped into place. Cold, focused, purposeful. I wasn't going to stay in that house another day. But I also wasn't leaving quietly. Michael came into the living room around 7 a.m. His hair was messy, his eyes tired, his shirt wrinkled. A man who wanted the night to erase the truth, only to wake up and find it staring him in the face. He opened his mouth, maybe to apologize, maybe to ask if I wanted coffee, but I stood up before he could speak. We're going out, I said. His brows pulled together. Where? Your work, I said. Your mother, your brother, anyone you lied to, anyone who helped you build this fantasy. We're going to talk to all of them. His face went white. Why? He whispered. Because, I said, slipping on my shoes, you didn't just build a new life. You used my absence as your alibi. And I want to hear exactly what story you've been telling. He ran a hand through his hair, panic rising sharply. You don't need to do this. I stepped toward him. I need the truth. And you're not going to hide it behind closed doors anymore. He inhaled shakily. They already know. Good, I said. Then they can repeat it to my face. He didn't argue. He knew better now. I grabbed the car keys from the bowl by the door. Another thing that used to belong to us, now filled with keys to a life I didn't recognize. Michael followed me out, defeated, shoulders slumped. Lena peeked from the hallway as I closed the door. Her hand rested protectively over her stomach. I didn't hate her, not anymore. But I couldn't comfort her either, not in that moment. Not until the truth was fully out. Michael and I rode in silence to the first stop, his mother's house. The entire drive, he sat rigidly, staring forward. I watched him in the reflection of the window. His jaw clenched, his fingers tapping a frantic rhythm on his knee. Fear suited him. It forced honesty where lies had once lived comfortably. When we pulled up to his mother's driveway, he hesitated. "We don't have to go inside," he said quietly. "Yes," I replied. "We do." He sighed, defeated. Inside, his mother looked surprised, disoriented even, like I was a memory that had suddenly stepped into her kitchen. "Oh," she breathed. "You're home." Her tone was careful, too careful. I didn't waste time. "Did Michael tell you we were divorced?" Her eyes darted to him, then to me, then back to him. "No," she said slowly. "He told me you were living separate lives, that you weren't planning to come back." "Did he tell you he moved another woman into our home?" She swallowed. "He said he wasn't alone anymore, but he didn't say who she was." My chest tightened. "Did you think to ask?" I didn't want to intrude. They had all tiptoed around his lie so carefully, so politely, so quietly that my entire marriage had disappeared without anyone raising a question. I turned to Michael. "This is what you built. A world where everyone believed I had abandoned you." He looked at the floor. I didn't know what else to do. "You tell the truth," I said sharply. His mother shifted uncomfortably. I didn't know he wasn't being honest. If I had known. "It doesn't matter," I said. "I'm not here for apologies." I walked out. Michael scrambled after me. The second stop was worse. His brother's house. His brother wasn't gentle like their mother. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't confused. He was angry. "With you?" I asked, stunned. "You're angry with me?" He crossed his arms. "You left him alone for years." My chest filled with heat, rage and heartbreak twisting together. "I left to build a future for us. I came home every year. I called. I visited." Michael stepped in quickly. "Stop. She didn't know. None of this is her fault." But he didn't defend me because he suddenly believed in me. He defended me because his house of cards was collapsing and he was desperate to keep anyone from watching the final pieces fall. His brother glared at him. "You told us you wanted out." Michael stayed at the ground. I stretched the truth. "Stretched," I repeated, laughing bitterly. "You turned me into the villain so you could disappear into a new life." His brother's expression shifted then. Not quite guilt, but the beginning of realization. "You lied to everyone," I said to Michael. "Not just me. Not just her. Everyone." He nodded slowly, shamefully, and in that moment, I saw something I hadn't expected. He was terrified of them knowing the truth, more than he had ever been afraid of telling me, because I was the one he betrayed. But they were the ones he performed for. He had built his new identity with them as his audience. And now, the mask was cracking. By the time we reached the third stop, his workplace, he was shaking. Not visibly, but I could feel the tremor in the air around him. The fear, the dread, the unraveling. "Please," he whispered as we walked toward the station. "Don't do this." "You already did," I said. When we entered, a few co-workers looked up. Confusion flickered across their faces. Recognition, then discomfort. One man, the captain, I guessed, approached cautiously. "Michael," he said slowly, "everything okay?" "No," I answered for him. "Nothing about this is okay." Michael's shoulders collapsed. I looked directly at the captain. "Did he tell you he was still married?" His expression confirmed everything I suspected. "He didn't," the captain said. "Did he tell you he was living with a pregnant girlfriend?" The captain's nostrils flared. He turned sharply toward Michael. "Are you kidding me?" Michael muttered something too low to hear. And then, suddenly, I felt it. Power. Not cruel power. Not vengeful power. Truth. Truth was power. He had built a life on deception. He had built trust with lies. He had built relationships on a story that painted me as the absentee spouse who didn't care. And now, with every word spoken, that illusion shattered in front of witnesses he valued. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to humiliate him with theatrics. Just the truth was enough to strike him where it hurt most. By the time we left the station, Michael looked hollow. Not sympathetic hollow. Not victim hollow. Hollow like a man who finally understood what honesty costs when you've avoided it for too long. On the way back to the house, neither of us spoke. I stared out the window, watching the town I used to love passing by, each street holding memories I didn't know were tainted now. And when we finally parked in the driveway, I turned to him. This, I said, was step one. He swallowed hard. Step one of what? Of reclaiming my life, I said. Of making sure you never again rewrite my story without me. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Good. Words had gotten him into this mess. Silence might finally teach him something. I got out of the car and walked toward the house, toward the woman he lied to, toward the life he tried to build on the skeleton of our marriage. But before I stepped inside, I looked back at him and said quietly, "You spent years preparing for a life without me. You never prepared for what happens when the truth walks back through the door." His face tightened. He knew. He finally knew. I wasn't the abandoned wife he painted me as. I wasn't the absent spouse he told stories about. And I wasn't the woman he thought he could quietly erase. I was done grieving. I was done wondering. I was done letting him control the narrative. And the next chapter would not be his. I didn't go back into the house right away. I stood on the porch for a moment, breathing in air that felt strangely heavier than before. The morning sun had risen fully, warming the wooden boards beneath my feet. The world outside looked normal, quiet street, trimmed hedges, a dog barking 2 houses down. But inside me, nothing was normal anymore. Everything had shifted. Everything had sharpened. Eventually, I opened the door. Lena was sitting at the dining table, hands wrapped around a cup of tea she probably hadn't touched. Her eyes were puffy, red, frightened. Not of me, I realized, but of her own future. The life she thought she was building had just been shaken by the same earthquake that destroyed mine. She looked up slowly. Is he okay?" I let out a breath. "He's dealing with consequences. That's all." She nodded once, almost timidly. Then, "I'm sorry." The words were soft, sincere, fragile. And this time, I could receive them. "I know," I said. "None of this is your fault." A tear slipped down her cheek. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I thought he was being honest. I thought he wanted a family with me because he couldn't have one with you. My heart clenched, not in the same jagged way it had when I first walked in, but in a quiet ache. She was hurt too. She was betrayed too. Just in a different corner of the same story. I sank into the chair across from her. "He led you on, just like he led me on." She nodded. "I feel stupid." "You shouldn't," I said. "You trusted someone you loved. That's never stupid." Silence washed over us. A softer kind this time. A kind that allowed breathing, settling, processing. I looked at her belly, not in resentment, but in something gentler. The baby wasn't to blame. The baby wasn't a symbol of betrayal anymore. It was simply a life. Innocent, unasked for, caught between 2 broken adults and 1 deeply flawed one. "What are you going to do?" I asked. She wiped her cheek. "I don't know. I can't stay here. Not like this." "You shouldn't have to." She straightened slightly. "I'll find another place. I can work. I'll figure it out." There was a strength inside her I hadn't noticed before, maybe because I had been too consumed by my own spiral. But now I saw it clearly. She wasn't weak. She wasn't fragile. She was overwhelmed. Yes, but still standing. That was more than I could say about myself on the day before. I stood. "Let's pack your things." She blinked, startled. "Now?" "Yes," I said gently. "He brought you into this mess. I'm helping you out of it." Her tears returned, but for a different reason. "Why would you help me? After everything?" I thought for a long moment before answering. Because he lied to both of us, and because neither of us deserves to stay trapped in the life he tried to build on deception. She covered her mouth, taking in a shaky breath. And together, slowly, we walked to the bedroom. Her bedroom, not mine. It hurt less this time. Maybe because the shock had faded. Maybe because I wasn't alone in the room. Maybe because I finally accepted that the life I once knew wasn't coming back, and that letting go didn't have to feel like defeat. While she packed clothes into a duffel bag, I started removing the small decorative pieces she'd added, the ones that had made the house feel foreign when I walked in. A photo frame, a candle, a stack of folded blankets in colors I never would have chosen. I wasn't removing them out of spite. I was making space. For myself. For clarity. For whatever came next. When we finished, Lena stood in the doorway holding her bag. She looked lost, grateful, afraid, and relieved all at once. "Will you be okay?" she asked me hesitantly. I nodded. "Eventually." "Are you?" She hesitated. "Eventually." We shared a long, quiet moment, two women tied together by the worst version of one man's choices. Then she stepped outside to call a friend for a ride. I watched her through the window. She hugged her bag close, glancing back toward the house several times, maybe saying her own silent goodbye to the illusion she'd believed in. Michael returned about 15 minutes later. His face was pale, hollow, embarrassed, and exhausted. He opened his mouth to speak, but his eyes landed on Lena by the curb, and whatever words he'd been forming fell apart. "She's leaving?" he asked, voice tight. "Yes," I said. "Why? Why now?" "Because she deserves better than living inside the ruins of your lies." He looked pained, but I didn't soften. Not anymore. He stepped toward me. "And you? What about us?" I looked at him carefully. Slowly. For the first time, I saw him not as the man I once loved, not as the man I married, not as the man who betrayed me, but simply as a man whose choices had finally caught up to him. "There is no us," I said. My voice wasn't angry. It was steady. Final. "You ended that long before I walked through the door." He swallowed. "Can we, at least, talk about it?" "We will," I said. "But not today. And not like this." His shoulders sagged heavily, as if the air itself had weight. Lena's ride pulled up. She glanced at Michael once, just once, and the expression she wore was heartbreak mixed with disappointment. A quiet kind. A permanent kind. She got in the car without another word. Michael didn't chase her. He didn't call out her name. He simply watched her leave, chest rising and falling slowly, like each breath hurt. When the car disappeared down the street, he turned back to me. "Is she coming back?" "That's not my question to answer," I said, "and not yours to assume." He nodded, staring at the floor. He looked defeated. But his defeat wasn't my responsibility. "I'll get a lawyer," he said eventually. His voice was thin. "I know what this means." "Good," I replied, "because I'm not going to prolong this. I want a clean divorce." He flinched, but he nodded again. "Okay." Finally, there was no more denial. No more hiding. No more acting like we were still on the same team. We weren't. Not anymore. And that hurt, but it also freed something inside me. He walked to the bedroom, and shut the door quietly. I didn't follow. I didn't want to see it again. Not until it was stripped of the life he'd built without me. Instead, I gathered my suitcase and stepped outside. I didn't know where I was going exactly. Hotel, maybe an Airbnb, maybe a friend from years ago. It didn't matter. What mattered was that the space I needed to heal wasn't inside that house. At the bottom of the porch steps, I paused. 10 years abroad. 10 years of holding on to a marriage I believed in. 10 years of trusting that love could stretch across oceans. And now, I was stepping into something else entirely. Not revenge. Not rage. Not destruction. Something quieter. Something slower. Something more honest. Rebuilding. As I loaded my suitcase into the trunk of the rental car, Michael opened the front door. For a moment, He looked like he wanted to run after me the way people do in movies. Dramatic, impulsive, redemptive. But real life isn't a movie. He stayed on the porch, and I stayed by my car. I'm sorry, he whispered. I know, I said softly, but sorry doesn't undo anything. He nodded once, the last nod he'd ever give me as a husband. I got in the car. I closed the door. I turned the key, and I drove away, not with anger, not with triumph, but with a calm I hadn't expected. A calm that felt like the first deep breath after a decade of holding myself together. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time in years, I knew exactly where I wouldn't be returning. Because healing doesn't always look like forgiveness. Sometimes, it looks like walking away from the wreckage with your head held high. And as the house shrank behind me, I felt the first ember of my new life warming inside my chest. Driving away from that house felt nothing like I imagined freedom would feel. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel like someone who had won anything. Instead, I felt like a woman who had survived something she didn't even know she was walking through. A woman who had stepped into a storm quietly and walked out of it slowly, carrying only what still mattered. I found a hotel on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just a place with clean sheets and the comforting hum of an air conditioner. The moment I closed the door behind me, the quiet wrapped around me like a warm blanket. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to perform strength for anyone. I didn't have to pretend. I didn't have to fill silence with conversation or justify where my time was going or feel guilty for the distance between me and the person I once promised forever to. For the first time, the quiet felt like a companion. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my coat, still with my suitcase untouched, and I allowed myself to finally exhale. Not the shaky, angry breaths I'd taken earlier. Not the heartbreak strangled breaths from the moment I saw that crib. Just a real breath. A breath that belonged to me. I thought about my future then. Not in the way I once had shared, intertwined, mapped out with someone else's rhythm, but in a slower, softer way. Something undefined. Something open. Something that didn't depend on anyone else's loyalty to survive. I thought about Lena too. I hoped she found a safer foundation than the one Michael had constructed for her. I hoped she learned to trust again. Someone who deserved her softness, someone who didn't treat her future like a secret that could be tucked away in a drawer. The baby. I thought about them more than I expected. Not with resentment or bitterness, but with quiet acceptance. Life had chosen a different path for them than the one I once hoped for myself. And that was okay. Not all futures are meant to be ours. Some belong to people we'll never meet again. As the hours passed, something inside me shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet. Forgiveness isn't a light switch. It's a slow, unfolding process that comes in waves when the heart is ready. But what I did feel was release. My marriage wasn't stolen from me. It wasn't destroyed in an instant. It was something that faded long before either of us wanted to admit it. Distance didn't break us. It simply revealed the cracks we never tended to. And Michael, he didn't become a villain overnight. He became a man who took the easy road every time the hard road was honesty. A man who built comfort out of convenience and confusion. A man who never told the truth because the truth would have required courage he didn't have. I still hurt. Of course I did. But I wasn't broken anymore. Just reshaped. And there's a strange kind of beauty in that. I spent the next few weeks sorting through lawyers, paperwork, practicalities. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't heated. It was simply necessary. We divided things. We closed accounts. We ended what had been a decade of promises with signatures and stamped documents. I grieved quietly, in my own way, in my own time. I took long walks. I reconnected with old friends. I called my mother and cried without needing to explain every detail. Sometimes, healing looks like the slow return of your own voice. And sometimes, it looks like telling that voice the truth. You didn't fail. You simply grew in a direction someone else chose not to follow. One night, sitting alone on the hotel balcony with a mug of tea warming my hands, I thought about everything that happened. The lies, the secrets, the moment my world cracked open in my own doorway. And instead of pain, I felt something else. Gratitude. Not for the betrayal, but for the clarity. Not for the heartbreak, but for the chance to start over. Not for the ending, but for the strength I didn't know I had until life demanded it. It takes courage to leave, but sometimes it takes even more courage to stay gone. My story didn't end in that house. My story began the moment I stepped out of it. Not as a wife, not as someone betrayed, but as a woman who learned, finally, that her worth was never dependent on who stayed. It was always rooted in the fact that she survived. And now, with the dust settled and the papers signed and the truth carved clean into the past, I can say this without hesitation. I'm okay. I'm more than okay. I'm finally myself again. Maybe that's what these stories really are. Not confessions of heartbreak, but reminders that no matter how deeply we're wounded, we are capable of stitching ourselves back together in ways we never expected. And maybe, somewhere out there, someone listening to this needs that reminder right now. So to them, and to you, I say this. You're stronger than the lies you've been told. You're braver than the heartbreak you've endured. And the life waiting for you is bigger than the one that hurt you. Did you like my story? Please like and subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story of mine travels. And if I could leave you with one final thought, one truth that carried me out of that doorway and into my new life, it would be this. Healing begins the moment you decide that someone else's choices will not define your future.